out the first time.
Chapter 20.
The minute Jake stepped in the door of the dry bean, Lorena saw that he was in a sulk. He went right over to the bar and got a bottle and 2 glasses. He was sitting at a table, piddling with a deck of cards. It was early in the evening, and no one was around. Usually 3 or 4 of the Hat Creek cowboys would be there by that time. Lorena watched Jake closely for a few minutes to see if she was the cause of his sulk. After all, she had sold Gus the Poke that very afternoon. It was not impossible that Jake had found out some way. She was not one who expected to get away with much in life. If you did a thing hoping a certain person wouldn't find out, that person always did. When Gus tricked her and she gave him the poke, she was confident that the matter would get back to Jake eventually. Lippy was only human, and things that happened to her got told and repeated. She didn't exactly want Jake to know, but she wasn't afraid of him either. He might hit her, or he might shoot Gus. She found she couldn't easily predict it, which was one of the reasons she didn't care if he found out. After that, she would know him a lot better, whatever he did. But when he sat down at the table and set a glass in front of her, she soon realized it was not her who had put the tight look in his face. She saw nothing unfriendly in his eyes. She took a sip or 2 of whiskey. About that time, Lippy came over and sat down at the table with him, as if he'd been invited. "Well, you've come in by yourself, I see," Lippy said, pushing his dirty bowler back off his wrinkled forehead. "I did. By God, I intend to be by myself," Jake said irritably. He got up and without another word took his bottle and glass and headed for the stairs. It put her out of sorts with Lippy, for it was still hot in her room, and she would rather have stayed in the saloon, where there was at least a breath of breeze. But with Jake so out of sorts, there was nothing to do but go upstairs. She gave Lippy a cool look as she got up, which surprised him so it made his lip drop. "Why are you looking at me that way?" he asked. "I never told on you." Lorena didn't answer. A look was better than words where Lippy was concerned. Then the very minute she got in the room, Jake decided he wanted a poke, and in a hurry. He had drunk a half a glass of whiskey while he was climbing the stairs, and a big shot of whiskey nearly always made him want it. He was dusty as could be from a day with the cattle, and usually had waited for a bath, or at least washed the grit off his face and hands in the wash basin. But this time he didn't wait. He even tried to kiss her with his hat on, which didn't work at all. His hat was as dusty as the rest of him. The dust got in her nose and made her sneeze. His haste was unusual. He was a picky man, apt to complain that the sheets weren't clean enough to suit him. This time he didn't seem to notice that the dust was sifting out of his clothes onto the floor. When he opened his pants and pulled the shirt tail out, a trickle of sand came with it. The night was stifling, and Jake so sandy that by the time he got through, there was so much dirt in the bed that they might as well have been wallowing around on the ground. There were little lines of mud on her belly where the sweat had caked the dust. She didn't resent it particularly. It was better than smoke pots and mosquitoes. It was only when Jake sat up to reach for his whiskey bottle that he noticed the dust. "Darn, I'm sandy," he said. "I should have bathed in the river." He sighed and poured himself a whiskey and sat with his back against the wall, idly running a hand up and down her leg. Lorena waited, taking a sip or 2 of whiskey. Jake looked tired. "Well, these boys," he said. "They are aggravating devils." "Which boys?" she asked. "Call and Gus," he said. "Just because I mentioned Montana to them, they expect me to help them drive them darn cattle up there." Lorena watched him. He looked out the window and wouldn't meet her eye. "I'll be damned if I'll do it," he said. "I ain't no cowpuncher. Call just got it in his head to go for some reason. Well, let him go." But she knew that bucking Gus and the captain was no easy thing for Jake. He looked at her finally, a sadness in his eyes, as if he was asking her to think of a way to help him. Then he grinned. His little, smart, lazy grin. Gus thinks we ought to marry, he said. I'd rather go to San Francisco, Lorena said. Jake stroked her leg again. Well, we will, he said. But don't Gus come up with some notions. He thinks I ought to bring you on a drive. Then he looked at her again as if trying to fathom what was in her thoughts. Lorena let him look. Tired as he was, with his shirt open, there seemed nothing in the man to fear. It was hard to know what he himself feared. He was proud as a turkey cock around other men, irritable and quick to pass an insult. Sitting on her bed, with his clothes unbuttoned, he seemed anything but tough. What was old Gus up to this afternoon, he asked. He never got back until sundown. The same thing you was just up to, Lorena said.
You stupid clump of
Jake
coal
lifted his eyebrows, not really surprised. I noted. That scamp, he said, left me to work so he could come and pester you. Lorena decided to tell it. That would be better than if he found out from somebody else. Besides, though she considered herself his sweetheart, she didn't consider him her master. He had not really mastered anything except poking, though he had improved her card game a little. Gus offered me $50, she said. Jake lifted his eyebrows again in his tired way, as if there was nothing he could possibly be told that would really surprise him. It angered her a little, his acting as if he knew everything in advance. He's a fool with his money, Jake said. I turned him down, Lorena said. I told him I was with you. Jake's eyes came alive for a moment, and he gave her a smart slap on the cheek. So quick, she scarcely saw it coming. Though it stung her cheek, there was no real anger in it. It was nothing to some of the licks she had taken from Tinkersley. Jake hit her once, as if that was a rule in the game they were playing, and then the life went out of his eyes again, and he looked at her with only a tired curiosity. I reckon he got his poke, he said. If he didn't, you can hit me a lick. We cut the cards for it, and he cheated, Lorena said. I can't prove it, but I know it.
You son of a
He
bitch.
gave me the $50 anyway. I ought to told you never to cut the cards with that old cud, Jake said. Not unless you're ready for what he's ready for. He's the best card cheat I ever met. He don't cheat often, but when he does, you ain't gonna catch him. He wiped some of the mud off her belly. Now that you're rich, you can loan me 20, he said. Why should I? Lorena said. You didn't earn it. You didn't stop it. Besides, he had money from his own card playing. If she knew anything, it was not to give a man money. That was nothing more than an invitation to get sold with their help. Jake looked amused. Keep it then, he said. But if it had been any other man than Gus, I would have shot you. If you'd known, she said, getting up. Jake stood looking out the window while she stripped the bed. He sipped his whiskey, but didn't mention the trail again. Are you going with the herd, she asked. Ain't decided, he said. They'll be here till Monday. I plan to leave when you leave, she said. With the herd or not. Jake looked around.
Good work
She was
for an
standing in her
amateur.
shift, a little
Soon as
red
they're in
spot
that
on
cell,
one
you can
cheek
get
where he had
yourself
slapped her.
paid.
A lick that made no impression
Here's
on
your
her at
due.
all. It seemed to him there was never much time with women. Before you could look at one twice, you were into an argument, and they were telling you what was going to happen. You'd look a sight in a cow camp, he said. All them darn cowboys are in love with you anyway. I'd have to kill half of them before we got to the Red River if you go along. They won't bother me, she said. Gus is the only one with the guts to try it. Jake chuckled. Yes, he'd want to cut the cards twice a day, he said. It seemed to him harder as he got older to find a simple way of life. On the one hand, there were his friends who expected something of him. On the other, there was Laurie, who expected something else. He himself had no fixed ideas about what to do, though he thought it would be pleasant to live in a warm town where he could find a card game. Having a pretty woman to stay with made life happier, of course, but not if it meant having to take the woman to San Francisco. Of course he could run. He wasn't chained to the bedpost or to the friends either. There was Mexico right out the window. But what would that get him? Mexico was even more violent than Texas. Mexicans were always hanging Texans to make up for all the Mexicans Texans hung. If hanging was all he had to look forward to, he'd rather take his in Arkansas. Lori was watching him with a strange heat in her eyes. It wasn't because he had slapped her either. He felt she was reading his mind. Somehow most women could read his mind. He had only really outmaneuvered one, a little red-headed whore in Cheyenne who was all heart and no brain. Lorena wasn't going to be fooled. Her look put him on the defensive. Most men would have beat her black and blue for what she had done that afternoon, and yet she hadn't even made an attempt to conceal it. She played by her own rules. It struck him that she might be the one to kill the sheriff from Arkansas if it came to that. She wouldn't balk at it if he could keep her wanting it.
Been a minute.
You don't need to stand there looking out of sorts, he
I got
said.
it. Weapons, I got it. Deeds, I got it. You just better have the right price for me. Got it?
I won't run off without you. I ain't out of sorts, she said. You are. You don't want to stay, and you don't want to go. Jake looked at her mildly.
Remember.
I've been up that way, he said. It's rough. Why don't we go up to San Antonio and gamble for a spell? Tankersley took me there, Lorena said. I don't want to go back. You're a hard one to please, Jake said, getting a little testy suddenly. I ain't, Lorena said. You please me fine. I just want to go to San Francisco like you promised. Well, if you don't like San Antone, there's Austin or Fort Worth, Jake said. There's lots of nice towns that ain't as hard to get to as San Francisco. I don't care if it's hard, Lorena said. Let's just go. Jake sighed and offered her more whiskey. Lay back down, he said. I'll rub you back. I don't need my back rubbed, she said. Lori, we can't leave tonight, he said. I was just offering to be friendly. She had not meant to press him so, but a decision had become important to her. She had spent too many nights in the little hot room they were in. Taking the gritty sheets off the bed made her realize it. She had changed them many times because the men she lay under were as gritty as Jake had been. It was something that had repeated itself once too often, and she was done with it. She wanted to throw the sheets, and maybe the mattress and the bed, too, out the window. She was through with the room and everything that went with it, and Jake Spoon might as well know it. Honey, you look like you caught a fever, Jake said, not realizing it was a fever of impatience to be done with Lonesome Dove and everything in it. If you're set on it, I reckon we'll go, but I don't fancy living in no cow camp. Call wouldn't have it anyway. We can ride with them during the day and make our own camp. Lorena was satisfied. Where they camped made no difference to her. Then Jake started talking about Denver and how when they got there it would be easy to make their way across to San Francisco. She only half listened. Jake washed off the best he could in the little wash basin. She had only one spare sheet, so she put it on the bed while he was washing. Let's leave tomorrow, she said. But the herd don't leave till Monday, he reminded her. It ain't our herd, she said. We don't have to wait for it. There was something different about her. Jake had to admit, she had a beautiful face, a beautiful body, but also a distance in her such as he had never met in a woman. Certain mountains were that way, like the Bighorns. The air around them was so clear you could ride toward them for days without seeming to get any closer. And yet, if you kept riding, you would get to the mountains. He was not so sure he would ever get to Lori. Even when she took him, there was a distance between them. And yet, she would not let him leave. When they blew out the lamp, a shaft of moonlight came in the window and cut across their bodies. Lori let him rub her back, since he enjoyed doing it. She was not sleepy, In her mind, she had already left Lonesome Dove. She was simply waiting for the night to end so they could really leave. Jake got tired of the back rub and tried to roll her over for another poke, but she wouldn't have it. She pushed his carrot away, a response he didn't like at all. "Now, what's the matter now?" he asked. Lori didn't answer. There was nothing to say. He made a second try, and she pushed it away again. She knew he hated to be denied, but didn't care. He would have to wait. Listening to his heavy, frustrated breathing, she thought for a while that he might be going to make a fight over it, but he didn't. His feelings were hurt, but pretty soon he yawned. He kept twisting and turning, hoping she would relent. From time to time, he nudged her hip as if by accident. But he had worked all day, and he was tired. Soon he slept. Lori lay awake, looking out the window, waiting for it to be time to leave.